Let's get started. Morning, everyone. My name is Ben Sharp, Chief Revenue Officer at Commerce Vision. Thanks for joining us this morning. Let me do an intro and I'll introduce our special guest here this morning, and then we will dive into what should be a fantastic discussion this morning. So first up, welcome to the first ever episode of the B2B e-commerce exchange, a Commerce Vision podcast where we discover the stories of B2B commerce and beyond from across Australia and New Zealand. If you're new here and are yet to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter and be sure to give us a follow to stay in the know. Our producer will put links in the chat. And with that, allow me to welcome our very first guest on the podcast. He's a guru in all things commerce, the author of Leading with Kindness, Unlock Your Potential with Emotional Intelligence, and has one hell of a resume. Welcome to the podcast, Luke James.
What an introduction. Thanks, Ben. Much appreciated and very pleased to be here.
Luke, it'd be great if you could maybe give us an intro. I've heard about your background. It's so impressive in your experience working in both B2C but also with B2B brands across a whole range of different sectors and industries. It'd be great to hear kind of some of the stuff that you've been doing over the past 10 or more years.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the or more, not just the 10. So it's been a while. My background is really quite diverse. I started life picking and packing in a third-party logistics warehouse and found my way into online retail. And that journey is one we won't focus on, but to touch on what's really been driving for the last probably 15 years of my career. So most people who know me would know me for a couple of things. The first one would be the introduction of 3-hour delivery service in retail in Australia. So when the Iconic launched, I was part of that launch team. We were building that from scratch. It was something that I was doing after hours from a full-time role. And I was brought in effectively because the direct-to-consumer delivery process in Australia wasn't something that was happening, or at least not at scale from an online or digital perspective. So I was brought in from to help build all of that. And we then launched the 3-hour delivery service, which was an incredible shift in the market. So many other retailers tried to keep up with the Iconic. And if you ask anyone now if they don't have if they have a same day service and they say no, chances are that's going to be the minority rather than majority. So we've helped to, my team's helped to move that complete shift around in the way logistics is handled in e-commerce. I also spent some time helping to support eBay and building up their shipping proposition. Helped with Temple & Webster before they started to get large. So much when they were very in their early stages, I came and consulted with them and helped them to build their supply chain processes and what that looks like to move forward. And they still use some of that today. HelloFresh was another one that I helped to get off the ground. So it feels like I'm just, dropping names, but these were the things that I was involved in at the time. And as you can see, there have been things that have helped move the market. From there, I spent 4.5 years with Toll, which is now Team Global Express. My role at Toll was quite an interesting one. The first one was to try and take share of wallet from Australia Post, which is not an easy thing to do in the e-commerce space. And the second thing was to help build their long-term strategy around what that looked like. It's a really interesting 4 years. Ultimately, Toll's core business was in retail. So having an e-commerce or online retail delivery solution was absolutely paramount for it to work. And you can still see some reflections of that today in the service that you get from Officeworks, was from JB Hi-Fi, a lot of that same day and immediacy. That was a lot of the stuff that my team and I built through the course of my time at Toll. Then spent a couple of years with BoozBud as their director of supply chain and helped to scale them from 14 to 40 million over the course of COVID, which was, I won't lie, I was answering customer service calls at midnight on Easter long weekend because the whole industry had just shut down from COVID and no one was getting stuff delivered. And surprisingly, people were stuck at home and didn't know what to do other than have a glass of wine. And so that was an experience in customer service that I will never forget. And it really brought me closer to how do we improve the service offering from BoozBud to our existing clients and our long-term clients as well. From there, I spent some time with Woolworths as a chief operating officer for one of their business units, National Products Fulfillment. So that was third-party logistics. So I was in there as chief operating officer, and my role was to bring in more work. We landed some great clients in there, household names, which you would all know. And it was really about how do we transform that business to be able to handle the new face of multi-channel retailing, not just online, not just offline, not just B2B, but very much around that B2B and B2C. So in that role and in my toll role, that was very much focused on that B2B um, transaction and how you actually solve problems for clients. And now my current role is serving as the CEO and co-founder of Expert Fit, which is Australia's largest and leading advisory and consultancy made up of fractional executives. And in short, our goal is to build the future of executive engagement. And we do that by fractionalizing executives' times and making them available for people who can't normally afford a 30-year experienced executive in HR, but need that experience. And we work across many different domains: executive management, customer and strategy, people and culture, finance, and technology. We have some amazing people. We've got 42, 43 people who are actually part of the platform now. We've had up to 60 come through the pipeline. And it's been incredible because it's been mostly my network that have reached out and said, yep, we want to help you build this. So the summary is B2B, B2C, B2C, startup, corporate, corporate, startup, startup. Here I am again.
Love it, Luke. That is an amazing intro and really shows the experience you've had with multiple types of businesses of different sizes and some amazing brands as well. I'm sure you've felt like you've been at the forefront of innovation with many of them. Um, if there was one thing that stands out of each of those brands for you as a real highlight, I know I'm putting you on the spot here. What would it be?
Um, it's a good question. Obviously, the outward facing one is the 3 hour delivery service we launched at the Iconic. Now I went back there with a client of mine a few weeks ago, and they were moving thousands of same day delivery orders, which we're trying to get out the door in 3 hours. And it was incredible to see how some of the things that I put in place back in 2011 when we were working out of an office in Mary Street, which was our warehouse, our production studio, our buying group. We had everyone on trestle tables and $300 laptops just trying to make magic happen. We built a warehouse management system out of Microsoft Excel, and to see where it's come from and where it's gotten to now, I see that with a huge sense of pride. So I can see my reflection in a lot of their processes now. But I would say the one thing that I would really hang my hat on, and what kind of led me to writing the book as well, Leading with Kindness, is my time at BoozBud. And that was a really interesting career point for me because I had come out of corporate. I'd taken some time off to go, what do I want to do next? And I decided that it wasn't for me to go back into corporate right now. I really wanted to sink my teeth into something where I could leave my footprint again, and I could see that what I was building was something, a legacy that was going to last long after I left. And the team there were great. I worked with the 3 founders, Mark, Alex, and Andy, whom I still share a good relationship with today. And it was quite interesting because everyone in their business was not a veteran who had come in their particular field. They were coming into a startup. And so they were working across multiple different areas, and there was a lot going on at any one time. And I found what happened over time was part of my role was almost founder translation. So when we were going through processes and strategy and how we're building things, what I spent a lot of my time doing was helping the team focus on what does that actually mean for them. And through that time, I built the largest team across the business. So I looked after supply chain, I looked after customer success, and I often spent a lot of time helping to lead the other areas as well, who did need guidance or multiple different areas. We created new disciplines. We built a super robust team, and anytime we had a team get together, it was very, very rare that we didn't have people turn up. And all I did was treat them with kindness and show them what they really needed, which was that love and understanding about who they are and what their role was and how it fits into the organization, and also help to explore their capabilities so that they could lean on their natural advantages and provide a great outcome for the business. So for me, that's the one that, as much as amazing as the Iconic was, that was very functional, but from a very personal perspective, I love what I was able to bring to BoozBud, and I'm still very good friends with many of the people from my team from there as well.
Thanks, Luke. Very interesting. Based on what you said with your experience at BoozBud, is that what prompted you to write your book?
Um, it's part of it. It was a big part of it, but I think that the challenge I found in the corporate environments I've worked in is the lack of transparency, right? And when you work in a larger organization and it's, the vision isn't communicated very clearly, and we don't have all of the articulation of the values that are woven into everything we do each day, what I tend to find is that you get stuck. You don't quite know how to go and pull these things in properly and how to get them into a very human level. And so I look at the experience I had with BoozBud and how I could translate that into a larger corporate environment and build that team from a culture perspective, but doing that by giving them what they needed. And when I talk about kindness, it's not about putting an arm around someone and saying, "Are you okay?" It's actually about treating them with the respect they deserve. You have people who are out there every day, they're championing your business. The least you can do is give them positive feedback, reinforcement, critical feedback, continue to help them grow, find out what they want to be doing and help them grow towards that. Listen to their ideas. Even if you don't execute them, making sure that you've got a channel for them to speak to you on. And that's the core principles around that leading with kindness. You don't have to be the greatest person in the world, right? EQ is something we should all work on, and understanding and listening to the gaps. I liken it to music. So when you listen to a song, you don't just hear the notes, you hear the gaps in between the notes. And that's what actually creates the melody that creates the song. And that's where I see that those elements of kindness, you've got to plug them in to your team and ensure that they understand the mission that they're building towards and that they're aligned with it and it makes sense to them. And that's how you get some incredible performance, but most importantly, a culture that's super tight knit. And unfortunately, you see that happens at the lower levels of an organization where people really knit in together. You don't necessarily see it in the middle management and the senior management, and it's very rare that you have them cross over into both. And I think that they're the companies that really win where they can cross over into both.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, you're so right. We can sometimes get so caught up in technology, strategy, process, and operations that we sometimes miss the human element. And
Yep.
it's critical to everyone's success at a business perspective, but also from a personal satisfaction element as well, that you engage people based on their emotions, how they culturally align with you as a business, and also probably buy into the mission and vision for a business. Is that did that come about in your book as you were writing it?
Yeah, and the focus wasn't. The focus is more about challenging leaders about focusing on the right things, right? So I think if you talk to any leader in any business, they will tell you, and you will see the same thing in your day to day, Ben. It's about how do I continue to grow and evolve, and what are the things I need to focus on that are going to help me be better at my job? What are the things I need to focus on that are going to make my team stay engaged? And what are the things that I need to focus on that are not only going to engage them, but bring them on that journey? Things like setting up a set of values is great, but if you don't live them every day, you're not really leading into that at all. And so your team will pick up on it super fast and they will make decisions about you long before you have. And so it's about how do you actually set some structures in place? How do you change your mindset a little to go, well, if I was on the receiving end of this, how would I perceive it? And how would it make me feel? And taking those points of reflection to go, taking away the business elements at the moment. So let's be really clear. Everyone turns up to work every day because they need to make an income, right? Then there's a smaller percentage that turn up to work every day because they actually really enjoy it. And then you have the 1% who are like, I love doing this stuff so much, I'm going to go and do it myself. And I'm going to bring a team with me and I'm going to build them and they're going to be my champions and they're going to so on and so forth. And you find those really visionary entrepreneurs, they're the ones who have those super robust teams who you could say, here's a problem, solve it for me. And just because they're so interconnected, they'll find a way to solve it that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of before. And so it leads to that innovation. And when I talk about things like what we did at the Iconic with the 3 hour delivery, that innovation came out of disruption. And that disruption happens because you get a team that's super tight knitted. And so when I look at what we're doing now with Expert Fit, it's very much about disrupting the consulting and advisory space by utilizing fractional executives. not consultants. And so it means you get someone in your business that's helping you to solve the problem. So, three keys out of that. The first one is understand where you are. So, working on your self awareness as a leader is going to be super critical. You don't necessarily need to know where everyone in your business is, but you need to be very aware of where you are and focus in on that. If you have a gap, close it, which is what we do as leaders. We find ways to close that. So most leaders will be across that. The second one is understand that when you're in front of your employees, staff, team members, any of your resources, that you are, as a leader, the business. Whether it's your business or not, to the people who follow you, you are the business. So the way you react, the way you present yourself, the way that you talk about the business, the way you talk about the strategy, the way you talk about customers, all of that resonates through. So don't say, yep, customer X is great because they're paying the bills, but stuff and we're putting the prices up just because we need more money. Actually have a proper relationship with them. And then the third element of that is once you actually clear that space and you clear a runway for those people to think together, that's when this beautiful disruptive thinking happens. And that's when you start to see businesses that are starting to change the way that we engage with the world. And I think a great example of that is what The Iconic has done to become the largest online retailer of apparel in Australia. All they did to start with was let's break that 3-hour delivery service function, bring it into the core, make it part of the everyday. And now that's what they're famous for. And that's why everyone shops there.
Thanks, Luke. There's many topics there I'm sure resonate with all of us, whether you're in leadership or it doesn't matter what level in an organisation you might happen to be at. It's been a long and very interesting intro, and I think just before we dive into our first topic, I just want to remind everyone who's watching on our live feed. Feel free to send through any questions you have for Luke, and we'll get through to as many of them as possible over the course of our e-commerce exchange. So with that, let's dive into our first topic, the current state of B2B across ANZ. Luke, in your view, what is the current standard of B2B operations in 2024?
It's a great question. There's so many different elements to this to focus on. I think the one I'd like to focus on first is the uh, almost the customer and how the customer is viewed in a B2B transaction. And so this has been really interesting that over time, um, people are starting to focus on things like if my client is a direct to consumer business, then I am in B2B2C. And so that means that people kind of focus on what do I build here to give my client to deliver to their consumer. And that's a really interesting space to be in because you're making a hell of a lot of assumptions. And if you're not focused on listening to your customer, not their customer, but your customer, you're going to miss out on a lot of really interesting nuggets there. And I think this is something that's been a challenge for quite a long time that I've seen in this industry in Australia. And I think that the whole concept of being a excuse me, the whole concept of being in B2B is that you are definitely dealing with these problems that a business has. You have to solve at their level first. Sorry, excuse me. Apologies for that. Just a little frog in the throat. When you start to think about that conceptually, that's a really long value chain that you've got to get right for your customer, right? So your customer is the B2B part of it. And if you're trying to focus down here, that's a super long chain to get right. And I'd hate to break it to people, but that's not what anyone's good at. You got to niche down and focus on the elements that you can build and that you're a specialist at. So when I look at, for example, the B2B sales process in Australia at the moment, there are a few steps you have to go through. The first one is you need to be known. So that brings in thought leadership and how do I present what I'm trying to do and my thinking to people and to ensure that I get out there. You know, that's a big element of how you get in front of people. The second one is that it's about networking. And the one thing that I found, especially now I'm in my own business, is I am probably 80% networking rather than doing anything else. And that's about building those connections and relationships. And then the third one is about solving a customer's problem. So that's really interesting because it's the third part. It's not the first part, it's not the second part, it's the third part. And so the B2B space now has been so focused on trying to solve the whole chain. And what we're seeing a move towards is people going, okay, I'm going to niche down on my part. I'm going to focus on my customer. And so that's why we're starting to see now that uh, online retail, well, not online retail, but online business for B2B is starting to become very, very important because that's how we interact on a day-to-day basis with consumer brands. We're shopping online as it stands today, and when I know when I've tried to find services online, it's incredibly frustrating. You just don't know what you're getting. You don't have a comparison. If you went out today and tried to find a list of 3PL partners, you're going to find one or two review pages which will say, here's all these different 3PLs. These are the experiences that we've seen. You don't know what one's good at, what the other one's bad at, how they focus, what segment or category they're on. And I think that's part of where that migration now towards focusing on that B2B customer is going to be really important, and ensuring that you can give them that information at their fingertips when and where they need it. I think the second element of it, and that's the kind of the sales and the go to market strategy and the productization of what you're doing. I think the second part of it is then being, how do you actually solve the business's problem, right? And actually solution with them. Listen to what they've got to say, right? You don't need to build exactly what they ask for, but listen to what they've got to say and incorporate that feedback back into how you go to market and what your service proposition is. And I think over time, there are some great examples of this. So if you look at what Alibaba has done, Alibaba has just turned into Amazon for B2B businesses, because they heard that's what people want. I just want an Amazon-like experience that's super simple and easy and gets me my product here. That's all I care about. So they're a really fantastic example of a business which started off at one end, which was, I'm just going to facilitate a marketplace connection into a manufacturer, whereas now it's a full-blown marketplace that services the buyer very quickly and very easily. So as a business, if I was to resell product and source it through Alibaba, within a number of clicks, I can build a stock holding of 10,000 units of XYZ. It's very, very simple. It's very, very straightforward. And they made that very much about focusing on the seamlessness of the transaction, much like Amazon has done for B2C. And then I think the third element, solving for the customer's customer, I think that's where brands and businesses now are starting to understand they need to do some work there, but not focus everything on that proposition. And that's the really interesting component for me. Now, Ralph, I see that you've asked a question there, which is really quite interesting, which kind of touches on what I was speaking about before, but also what I'm talking through now. The concept of disruption is just about clearing the runway for the thinking, and so I think that that's a core component of it. And if you honestly believe as a business that you need to build a new revenue stream because you have a challenge, you have to be prepared to ask really uncomfortable questions, clear the space for it, and then invest in it. Right. And it shouldn't be a distraction to the rest of the business. It should absolutely be something that's carved out by itself, given its own air. Right. That can be quite hard for businesses to do. And if it is too hard, don't. Get back to your core, focus on it, narrow, cut all the fat from it. Then when you've got the space, you might still have all your disruptive ideas on a whiteboard, but that's where you're going to focus. As long as that disruption is on what's serving your customer, that's the most important part. So I've seen a lot of examples of B2B businesses trying to solve for an end consumer when they're not their customer. And so they'll put something out and go, this is what I think is going to be great. Let's go and do that. And customers don't want it. There's been a few examples of that recently, which have they've ended up with businesses being sold off or pushed into voluntary administration. So it's about getting focused, being really clear of what you need to do. Yeah. And when you're building that new revenue stream, as you're building it, you need to understand it's going to be new. You can't rob from Peter to pay Paul. You have to give it its own life, right? And if you carve that part out in your business, and this is very much in the B2B space, ensure that your core is performing exactly as it needs to. So it keeps putting food on the table. You should be able to grow it if the product market fit is right. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to grow it. But if you're starting to fall behind or you're starting to become a laggard, then I wouldn't be focusing on disrupting anything. I would be going back and focusing on how do I get the core to operate properly. Sorry, that was a lot. So key things for me are businesses are starting to understand better who their customer is, and I think that's that B2B component of the B2B2C. The second thing is that services that are available to them, such as what Commerce Vision has built, is improving and starting to revolutionize the way that businesses think around their go-to-market strategies. And the third one is absolutely then in building that innovation building that stream of innovation but not diluting and deferring away from the core of the business, and ensuring you're still making, the product that fits the market should be the best.
So true, Luke. I'm going to come to a question on your consulting experience in just a sec. But first up, Ralph, thank you for the question. And if there's anyone else online, feel free to drop some more questions in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them before we wrap up today. Luke, based on your consulting experience over the past year or so, I'm interested in understanding how B2B businesses developing their tech stack to better serve their customers.
Yeah, and it's a really good question. So the most of the space that these businesses are in at the moment is that they don't know what's available. And so what they do is they kind of look at, how do I build all of the elements that I need to be able to provide a solution or a service. And so you'll often find that they'll go to technology conferences, and they'll look around and say, right, what's the next idea I need to grab? And that's part of the challenge, in that they're not defining the problem statement first. They're really focusing on the solution. The core is that majority have built from, and I'll use the term impolitely, and I apologize, bastardization. I have a need, therefore I'm going to suck in that piece of tech over here and I'm going to plug it in. Um, the long story of that is, it looks like, when you leave your headphones in your pocket and they go through the washing machine and they get all tangled, and they just look like a mess, right? And nothing works properly, but it still kind of works, and it's almost enough to not go out and buy another set of headphones, but you should, and you're not getting the experience that you really should get out of it, and it's hard to actually make it work properly. Well, your businesses are the same, right? So people who or businesses who have been really successful have a great middleware which connects all of the systems together, right? Mental. It's absolutely mental. Like, how can we go from this and move into an environment where we're talking about API rich, easily integrated, single source of truth, which I can tell you now that every company I've worked with ever has said, we want a single source of truth. They need to go back and start to look at their data and how they're collecting it, right? And what do they do with that data? And in Toll, we were collecting, I think it was something like 60 million pieces of data each day. And what were we doing with it? Not much. Occasionally, I get queried from a data warehouse. Someone would want to follow up on building a sales report, but we weren't. We had the ability to understand who we were delivering to, how we were delivering, what works, what didn't, how we got the most rejections, how we got the most acceptances, what was compliant freight, what was non-compliant freight. There was so much rich data in there that was really a struggle to get a hold on it. So I think that more businesses now, particularly with the AI revolution, are starting to go, yeah, I need to understand my data. And that seems to be the focus at the moment, and trying to build that single source of truth. The second component of that is the processing of that data. So how can I take that data, enrich it, and then push it back into what my systems or services are providing to me, so I can give a better outcome to my customers? When people go through that process, they're generally dealing with things like ERP, inventory management platforms, order management systems, typically EDI systems for larger retailers. There's a lot of different complexities that go into that. And so it's very hard to have a single view of what's going on in your business at any one time. An SAP or, a Manhattan or something like that is seen as a solution to be able to supply that to you. And the reality is, most businesses go, well, it doesn't actually solve. It helps, but I've still got to put all these other things around it to solve. But what I see happening is that more and more businesses are going, I have this incredible tech stack, I'm paying X thousands or millions on keeping this stuff running, but it still isn't quite right. And it still isn't quite getting me what I need to get to. So there's been this very large growth in developers, offshore developers, helping to support businesses to break down those barriers. But most of the vendors aren't making it easy. They actually make it difficult for you to be able to integrate your data across different platforms. And that creates a virtual barrier from being able to give something that's super data rich and turn it into a really incredible, powerful piece of data that allows you to make decisions on your strategy going forward. But it's held back because you've got this clunky networked mess of systems in place. And the easiest way to tell how hard it is when you start working with a client and you ask questions, show us your network map. And then they bring out this A3 page of all these different lines going everywhere. And it's like, okay, so this is customer and that's finance. Oh, wait, that's finance there. Oh no, wait, there's customer. It's all over the shop, and they don't have a clear view on what that looks like. So it's a journey at the moment that most of these brands are going on, and they're looking for not necessarily a silver bullet, but not far from it. And there's not many silver bullets that are around in the market. There's some great products that solve part of the problem, and that's where they're seeing the gap and they're hiring developers to try and close that gap for them. It's a super interesting space at the moment.
Oh, you're so right, Luke. I think probably about 4 or 5 years ago, the silver bullet was possibly the term customer data platform
Oh,
(CDP), the single source of truth and where and how your customer data lives, and how it can be collected. Make sure you're compliant in the
yeah.
storage and use of that data, and then activate it. Um, what have you seen over the past couple of years in terms of CDP adoption? How difficult it is to get right? It probably goes to your previous couple of points, but also how do businesses avoid developing a Frankenstack and avoid having shelfware for years and years afterwards?
That's it's one of my favorite phrases is Frankenstack. So I appreciate you bringing that one up, and that's what we see a lot of. It's always going to come back to one single point, and that is what is the vision that you actually want to build, right? And you have to be very clear about what your end state is. So if you're setting out to have an amazing customer journey, then that's your end state. So as you work back from that, what are the key important parts to have? Now you mentioned CDP is a huge part of that, and CDP and data coming together and building that into something that's super powerful. I think KYC is one of my favorite terms that's been coined over the years, and for a long time I was like, kick, right? Sounds kind of aggressive, but effectively, you should be kicking everyone's ass in your organization to know your customer. The data that comes in and feeds into your business is going to be the simple core of it is garbage in, garbage out, and that's all it's ever going to be. You continue to feed garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So understanding that data, spending some time with a data scientist to actually build some visualizations out of it and understand what different things mean and how they play back to you is going to be super core. And then feeding that into a CDP that allows you then to go, right, I have my customer base here. I could segment based on multiple different areas. Your vision then needs to set, right, what's the core segmentation piece? Is my core now I need online retailers over here, or I need marketplaces over here, or I need a wholesaler over here. Understanding what those core elements are going to be will also help you say, my vision is to be the number one supplier to FMCG wholesale businesses, right? That's narrowing down. That's getting your vision all the way to a point. And now, once you work back from that, that allows you to then say, once I've got all that customer data, tick, I've got the CDP, which is pulling it all together for me, tick. What do I now need to do to take that data and turn it into something that's going to be marketable and compelling to demonstrate our value to the FMCG marketplace wholesaler? That's really what it's got to be about. So that migration into CDP is still occurring for a lot of businesses, unfortunately, and they mask it with a CRM. Like I've seen businesses try to use Zendesk as a CDP, and it's not going to give them what they need. HubSpot comes a long way, but there's a lot of different elements to go through. But the data points that you're going to need allow you to communicate with your client around exactly what it is you want them to know. And that's a core part of actually getting to your go to market strategy and building your pipeline. But it also helps you to go, right, how do I then push this into that vision if it's astray from it? Because I've got a North Star. I need to keep pushing to that North Star.
So true, Luke. You're kind of talking to a degree about the convergence of both B2B and B2C. And speaking of changes in the B2B space, where do you see that B2B and B2C are now acting in relation to each other?
It's very cool that we're starting to see B2B identify what's happening in consumer and copy it. And as they say, imitation is the best form of flattery. It actually talks to, here's the really cool parts of what's happening in ecom and how do we migrate towards that. There's been a number of businesses over the last, probably, I would say, 5 years, and this trend is still continuing, who have gone, wouldn't it be easy if we could bring everything together in one place and create a marketplace for small vendors to just click and go, yep, I need X, Y, and Z, off we go. Now, if you take a step back and think about where that came from, that's Officeworks. They've been doing it for 15 years, 20 years, right? That's part of what they built as their strategy, is we're going to be a one-stop shop for someone to come and get everything that they need from all these different retailers. Now that marketplace vibe is starting to come into B2B, what we're doing is we're democratizing that whole sales process. And that becomes super compelling, because that's exactly what we've seen with B2C over time, is that we're no longer having to go and shop in a mire for all those concessions. We can go and shop online and get all of them delivered in one parcel if we're really clever about it. We can go to Amazon and find everything we need. We can go to, I lost it. We can go to the Iconic and get all these different brands coming through. Right? There's just so many different areas where that's starting to happen. And so that convergence between B2C and B2B is starting to come much, much tighter. And the other element of it is that, and this might be a controversial take, but I think that a lot of B2B businesses see an online channel as a margin maximizer, because they feel it's democratizing the sales process, and it's removing people from the process, and it's all about getting clicks and so on and so forth. But the reality is, it doesn't work out like that. A direct to the end user business still has the same challenges, but they don't have the scale to make the unit economics work. And so it's really, really interesting that it's a path that many seem to continue to go down, without understanding the impact on the overall margin of the business. And so if you look at some of the larger players at the moment, like, for example, Woolworths has a huge B2C business, massive, right? I wouldn't be surprised if they're the largest again this year. Now, do you think that's as profitable as a grocery store? It's a great question, isn't it? I bet I can tell you right now that they don't factor in the pick pack costs, right? The delivery costs, the packaging, all of the communications, the technology platforms, the messaging systems, the website, the back end of connecting everything together, loyalty, the data analytics that need to happen to present the right product to the right people at the right time. Don't have to do that in a store. So there's some really interesting questions that I think need to be answered around that convergence in between B2B and B2C. And so they're running on parallels. I'm not sure where it ends. I have a theory which says that B2B brands are going direct, or even just like a Nike going direct and cutting out the wholesaler in the middle. We've probably got another maybe 5 to 10 years on this journey, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see it revert back to the norm, and you have experts who are doing the e-commerce component on behalf of these other businesses, who find ways to make it facilitate it at the right margin, the right speed, the right accuracy, and that becomes the fallback position, and kind of makes marketplaces become super powerful.
Mm. Yeah, you're so right. Just touching on something that you said there, as B2B and B2C converge, and rather than it being a unit economics maximizer, many businesses suddenly realize when they add B2C elements to their online B2B solution, they
Yeah,
suddenly recognize that there's so much complexity in a B2B transaction. How you find a customer, how you account manage, how you trade with them, what goods, services, products, pricing, and availability you present to them. When do you ship to them? How do they complete a transaction? These are very, very difficult things to get right when
totally.
you
Yeah.
try and converge these two together. Have you how do you see that? Like, it obviously keeps some things separate, right? A business that has both a B2B and a B2C part of their business, but
Yep.
what do you see in that part of the market?
Two things need to be kept separate. The first one is payment terms. That's the most critical path, right? You can't. Uh, there's been marketplaces that have been developed that have gone, yep, we're going to go and build a marketplace for these vendors, and it's going to be credit card. Like, well, hang on, I've been paying on account on 30 days for the last 25 years. why would I want to pay credit card now and completely destroy my cash flow? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, can we get back to our original terms? So that's one. And I think that that's going to be a battleground which will continue for many years. There's also an element of how frictionless we can make that billing experience. And that a lot of that is relying on the financial fintech and financial firms to, I guess, remove friction points. And we start to see it now there's a new app that's come out recently, which is called I think it's called Witzer, and that's for builders or for people who are building a home, and they engage trades. And what they do is they use the app to secure the funds and say, right, it's a bit like Airtasker. We're going to hold your payment here, and then once um, the vendor has completed the task and the customer has agreed with it, that's when we send the transaction across. So the vendor's got confidence that the money's coming, and the customer has confidence that the job's going to get done, and money doesn't change hands until they're both there. So I think something like that's going to have to happen in the B2B space from a payment perspective. Whereas I've got Afterpay, ZipPay, credit cards, debit cards, whatever. I can pay in about 8 million different ways on most platforms. And that's getting a lot easier. So I think that's probably one battleground that still needs to be brought to a pointy end. And the second one is logistics. It's I've seen many times before, and there are many businesses who have had this challenge. And one that sticks to mind, and this isn't to stick the knife into anyone, but Mainfreight was working very hard to build a liquor business. And they were very, very good at servicing Dan Murphy's and Liquorland and so on and so forth. Pallets of freight, mixed pallets, cartons of freight, very, very good at it. When it came down to servicing B2C, they discovered very quickly they had to completely rebuild the entire process. And they ended up trying to break out their inventory. So they had a B2B and B2C pick. So you've not got the same people going and picking the products. So then your workforce is having to grow. So you can't take downtime from this time and go and put them over there. You actually need specialists who understand how to do it, because you're now getting down to single bottles, single cases, lots of different things that are getting picked to go out the door. And ultimately what that led to is that brands, such as some of the traders, word will come to me, Brown Foreman, for example, most of their business is selling whiskey by the case or by the pallet, and getting that into larger DCs. When it comes to get down to a single pick, they had to look elsewhere to be able to provide that capability. Otherwise, what they were finding is just there's no urgency. I know I've got to get 10 pallets to Dan Murphy's DC tomorrow, but I can't handle getting a single bottle out to Luke today. And that's the core difference in between the two. So I think that those two battlegrounds, both the financial aspect and how payments will work, is one, and the second component for me is understanding the complexity in the two different supply chains, and how that's going to impact your customer.
Thanks, Luke. We do have a question on a related topic to what we've just been talking about. It is from Justin, and he asks, you both somewhat touched on this, but if a business had a clean slate, how do they avoid tech debt? What's the bare minimum stack from a data and data architecture perspective to enable a strong foundation? And does this differ between B2B and B2C?
That's an incredible question, and I think if I had the answer to that, I could probably put my rates up 3 times. So, Justin, you're asking the right question. When you start a business from a clean slate around a data perspective, I think the core thing that you want to understand is what are the most important components of that data first. That's where you've got to start from. So, from the perspective of the iconic, right, and I come back to this one because of just how incredibly they've grown over time. Their customers are consumers. What they want to know that's really important to them about that customer is what style, what brand, what colors do they resonate with? Also, what sizes, right? And what sizes and how fast do they want their delivery? That's going to allow them to provide some super rich data around what to present to the customer and how to market to them, and so on and so forth. That's very different to a B2B business. A B2B business wants to understand, how do I maximize the sales on my top 20% of my SKUs so that I can grow my sales pie. Now, that could be anything from a very simple CRM, which is going to hold that information in there and tell you who your contacts are and how much do they buy, what is their current target market, who are they marketing to, right? It's a very different set of data. So it's not a very straightforward answer what you're asking for. But I think once you get a clear articulation on what it is that your business is going to focus on, you should always be going, right, what are the things that are going to grow this business? So what's going to grow um, a real estate business, right? Is it going to be salespeople or is it going to be stock? It's going to be stock in the right places, right? And that's what you've got to focus on: is how do I go and build up that supply, that demand? Sorry, how do I go and build up the supply of stock so that I can then go to market to my customers? That's very, very different to what you get in B2C, where you could start drop shipping product and testing if people like it and pivot like that. Because that typically in an eComm or B2C perspective, you're focusing on how do I generate sales. It's a much different engagement. So I think that it's probably not as simple as we might think around how to have a tech debt free environment. But I think it is about ensuring that your core component around data is serving you the way that you need it to serve you, so you're not serving it. You may get to a point where you say, I've got my 400 listings for my houses, for my properties. I'm very comfortable with that. I've got enough salespeople for it. Great. But guess what? I'm going to have a payroll system. Sorry, but it's the way it works. So some of it is avoidable. I think the core component is don't frankenstack your core. Keep your core very clean. Keep your data very clean and focused on what your vision for the business is and what your mission for the business is. Everything else, frankenstack it as much as you like. Just don't stuff with the middle. It's going to be super important to you. Let's face it, we're all in the same thing, selling.
So true, Luke. I love that you've managed to drop Frankenstack in several times through today's podcast, and I think it's the word of today, which is great. With that, as part of this ongoing series, we like to have our guest prompt a question that will be answered by next month's guest. Sometimes we
Mhm.
don't yet know who that will be, so it's always a fun exercise in thought provocation. So, with that, what question would you want to pose to our guest next month?
I'd like to hear, knowing what we know today, after having come through COVID and seeing what that's thrown at us, if you were to start a business tomorrow, what would you focus on first? People, process, product? What would be the focus for you? That's what I'd love to hear. Because I think everyone has very different views on that, but it'd be very interesting to hear that from your next guest.
Luke, I'm looking forward to that, the answer to that question and that discussion next month. Well, with that, we're at the end of today's episode. Luke, a huge thank you again for joining us for our very first episode. We'll be sure to add your LinkedIn in the chat, but before you go, let everyone here know what you've got going on and how we can best connect with you.
No problems, and thank you for having me, Ben. It's been a pleasure to chat through these things. I'll try not to drop Frankenstack too many more times, but we'll keep it as word of the day. So, Expert Fit is very much about helping smaller businesses to solve problems. So, if you think about the concept of I've gotten to a scale stage or I've gotten to a stick in my business, and what I really need is I need a COO. Now, not many businesses can afford to go and spend $300,000 a year on a COO, but what if you could hire one for 10 hours a week? Or what if you could find people to solve that problem for you? That's where our business jumps in. And we can find people to give you that support. And everyone in our business has an average of 27 years experience in their field. So you're not just getting a rookie, you're not promoting someone young, you're actually bringing someone in who can help drive that from a strategy and execution perspective. Really great idea to work on is if you do have someone in your organization you want to bring up, you can use one of our experts to help coach them, set the vision and the strategy, and then they can walk out and you've got a ready-made COO.
Thank you, Luke. And where can we connect with you? How do we find you and the
Yep.
Expert Fit?
Best place is on LinkedIn. So it's very easy once you get into my profile. It's Luke-James1. So I managed to claim the first one. Apparently, there are a lot of Luke Jameses on there. I've managed to find about 11 of them. But otherwise, you can find Expert Fit at expert-fit.com. And on there, you'll be able to meet and see many of our other people who are involved in the business. There's about 38 people on there now. And we also have some of our products and specializations that we focus on too. And by all means, if you want to reach out and have a chat, jump in, hit the contact form, and one of us will reach out to you.
Awesome. Thank you again. We'll definitely be circling back with you, Luke, next season to see what the state of B2B is then. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I've got a lot out of it, and hopefully everyone that's joined us has as well. Thank you for everyone for coming along, and a big shout out to those of you who asked questions. They were really insightful and fantastic to get some engagement along those lines. For any questions that you still have that we just could not get to, please stay tuned on our LinkedIn feed. You might see some more bonus content coming your way. Luke, thank you again. Really enjoyed the chat, and thanks for spending the time with us. And for everyone that listened, thanks for joining us as well. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Pleasure, man. Bye.